Hi, folks. Thank you all for joining us today and for your interest in the psychological sciences programs here at the Cairn Institute. My name is Mung Lim. I'm the academic registrar and student services manager here at Cairn Miller, and I'm very pleased to be able to also welcome Dr. Chris Kilby, our course coordinator, Professor Linda Byrne, our dean, as well as Georgia Hutchinson, one of our current student representatives. It's really great to have their input today and for each of you to hear directly from some of our current faculty and students what exactly it's like to study not only at Cairn Miller, but specifically within the psychological sciences programs. So I really encourage you all to take advantage of this opportunity, ask lots of questions in the chat, and looking forward to some really great discussions. Before we get started, I do want to pass to Professor Byrne for an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Mung. I'd like to acknowledge that Cairn Miller is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge their deep and enduring connection to the land and waters and community. We'd like to acknowledge the richness and value of their accumulated cultural knowledge that spans a long period of time, and we extend this respect to all Indigenous peoples of the continent and adjacent lands, and to any First Nations people who might be joining us today or come across our material. Do you want me to do this one as well? Oh, or are you going to do this one?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and particularly welcome to Georgia. Thank you so much. It's always wonderful to have one of our students that comes along to these information sessions and is able to share their actual experience of what it's like to do our courses. So why Cairn Miller? Who are we? Well, we've been around since the 1960s, pioneering psychology and counselling in Australia. We've been a higher education provider in terms of TEXA since the mid-2000s, and we only offer psychology, counselling and psychotherapy courses, or courses that are adjacent to that, such as our trauma-informed care courses. We have flexible study options, so this particular course that you'll hear about today is entirely online. And we have experts and practitioners who teach within all of our courses. So in our counselling courses, we have registered counsellors, we have psychologists that teach across our psychology courses. And then, of course, we have our people that have their PhD qualifications in psychology, who have that really deep depth in terms of psychological theory as well as practice. We've got national averages in ratings from students and graduates above the national ratings. In particular, our psychology courses are ranked higher than a lot of courses at the group of 8 in terms of student experiences. And we have really nice facilities in person, even though you'll be joining a course that's online, if you're ever around in Hawthorn, to come and see our facilities. And these extend to community clinics that we also have around Melbourne. We have support services for study, we have learning equity, and we have student support in terms of academic support. We offer also support for research and career advice. And we also, for our graduates, have professional development and lifelong learning. So a number of our alumni will come back to work with us through our professional development, and even more come back and worked with us as supervisors within our professional training programs as well. And we're a bit different from a number of other providers. We're not-for-profit, which means that donations and tuition fees go back into our courses to support our students and also go back into our community. So we offer low and no cost counselling, psychotherapy to the communities that we serve. We like to talk about the triple helix here at Cairn Miller, which incorporates our education arms, that's our training, with research and clinical practice. And we believe it's the intersection of all of these that makes us a lot stronger and that helps us to graduate scientist practitioners across counselling and psychotherapy. Next slide, please, Mom. I guess it's worth just talking about, because we are a provider that has counselling and psychotherapy as well as psychology. Even though you're here to talk about a psychology course, understanding the difference and the intersection of these two areas is quite useful. They're separate but related disciplines, and we have the overlap of evidence-based practice. We have psychology drawing from the skills of counselling, and certainly both of these fields are highly in demand. I won't go through all of the information on the slides, but just to understand that there is a difference between the training models and the approach, but we like to marry those together here at Cranmiller in a way that we think works very well for our graduates.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate you coming and opening our session.
That's all right. I might just put myself on mute and hide, but if anyone wants to ask me a question later on, I'll just be lingering in the background.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Chris Kilby. I'm the course coordinator for the graduate diploma. I'll be taking the next probably 25 minutes of this session. I'm not a clinician. I'm a researcher by training, so I have my PhD. And my area of interest and research is in stress, trauma, coping, well-being. So I do a lot of work with youth residential workers, so people that look after children removed from their families. And we look at how they can do the fantastic work that they do in a really safe way. And we look at the best sort of models possible. Before I jump into the nuts and bolts of the graduate diploma and talk a little bit about what it is, I wanted to start off by just flagging with everyone exactly where the graduate diploma sits within the bigger model of how you become a psychologist. Because most people come to a graduate diploma to start your pathway to becoming a psychologist. Now, the graduate diploma is step one. It's the beginning journey. There's a nice big red box there around undergraduate psychology. And the graduate diploma is a one-year equivalent of a 3-year bachelor's. So we cram 3 years of material into one. After your undergraduate, you still need to do another year of study in your honors year, and then 2 more years of study in a master's. So it might be a master's of professional psychology, where you do 1 year of coursework and 1 year of supervised practice, or it might be 2 years in a master's of clinical psychology. But you've got 2 years after your honors before you get your general registration. So it's 4 years all up before you become a generally registered psychologist. If you want to be able to say that you're a clinical psychologist, it's another 2 years of supervised practice after that. So full-time, it's 6 years from this course to the end before you're a clinical psychologist. Just so that you understand that you're at the beginning of quite a marathon in this field. Could I grab the next slide, please? Okay, so what's the difference between the graduate diploma and a bachelor's, and how does it fit into the overall sequence? Well, if you've already done a bachelor's of psychology, you could go for a bachelor's of psychology honors. You could apply for honors. But life happens and sometimes you don't get in, who knows? If your bachelor's wasn't enough, your APAC accredited Bachelor of Psychology wasn't enough to get into honors, you could do our graduate certificate as an alternative entry. The graduate certificate of psychological science is half of the graduate diploma. And we'll talk about the units in a moment. But it's an alternative entry. It's a second attempt to get into honors. If you've done a bachelor in any other field, anything other than psychology, then you do our graduate diploma of psychological science. This is the full 1-year course. And once you've done this graduate diploma of psychological science, it's the equivalent of that bachelor's. So then you can apply for honors. Now, the other point that I just wanted to make is the graduate diploma is what we call an APAC accredited course. So you're going to see this APAC thing come up a lot today. If you're not familiar, APAC is the Australian Psychology Accreditation Council. They are the peak body that accredit universities and higher education providers like us to teach psychology. So you need to complete APAC accredited courses to be able to later on apply for registrations as a psychologist. So this is really important. The graduate certificate is not APAC accredited, and that's because it's only half of the graduate diploma. It's like half of a bachelor's. So it's only there as an alternative entry into honors, and it only works because you've already completed an APAC accredited bachelor's. So I just wanted to flag that. The grad cert is not APAC accredited, but the grad dip is. I've got a nice reminder for myself there to talk about RPL.
Sorry, Chris, can I just interrupt?
Go for it.
Just because I think people get a little bit confused about APAC accreditation, and if they hear something's not accredited, as Chris talked about, the graduate certificate is a way for people whose qualifications might be quite old, or they didn't quite hit the mark that they wanted to in terms of what they need for for getting into honours to um, have an opportunity to do that. Now, Chris is going to talk about RPL and how RPL sits with us as an organisation. And so therefore, the graduate certificate doesn't have to be accredited in order for it to be a pathway for people to then get into honours, because you've already got that accredited pathway already. And so this is basically a way of either boosting that. If your qualifications are old, so older than 10 years, there used to be this 10-year rule where if your qualifications are more than 10 years old, then they couldn't be used to apply for APAC accredited courses. That's no longer the case, but the APS and the Psych Board might say, look, we want you to refresh those skills, but they don't offer any advice about what those refreshers can be. So the graduate certificate can be either a refresher of that information if your qualifications are old, or they can be an opportunity to allow you to boost that score from an already accredited course. So don't worry about that in terms of APAC accreditation. It's not necessary for the purposes that it's used for here.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Now, RPL stands for Recognized Prior Learning. So if you've done a bachelor's in another field, you might have taken units that were part of a psychology course, an APAC accredited course. And perhaps you haven't. Perhaps you've done something like, say, social work, and you did a mental health unit that was part of, say, social work, but it wasn't part of a psychology course. APAC have some very specific rules that we need to follow to keep our accreditation where we have it. And one of those rules is around recognized prior learning. So we're only allowed to give recognized prior learning for units where that unit has come from an APAC accredited course. So going back to the example of whether or not you did a social work mental health unit or a mental health unit from an APAC accredited course, we could potentially give RPL for that mental health unit from the APAC accredited course, but we couldn't give it if it came from a social work course that didn't have APAC accreditation. So this is a rule that we need to follow, but it's one to keep in mind if you are looking at doing RPL, that it needs to come from an APAC accredited course. The other thing that I add with that, sorry, just before we jump onto the next slide, with the graduate certificate, because that's about a reattempt at your bachelor's, we often recommend against RPL because the point of this unit is to reattempt those units and to try and bump up your grade a little bit. So if you use RPL on a graduate certificate, you're kind of not getting your money's worth for it, and you're not really using it for its intended purpose. All right, can I jump to the next slide? Thank you. So why come to CanMiller for the Graduate Diploma of Psych Science? Well, it's fully online, and because of that, we can do some pretty interesting online things. We try to simulate an on-campus experience as much as we can, despite being online, and we use a flipped classroom model. So what this means is that there are asynchronous lectures that you watch in your own time before you attend a synchronous or a live tutorial. And most of our tutorials are what we call active learning. So what this means is that you're generally getting hands-on with the material that you're learning about. You're connecting in with other students. And these tutorials are really about preparing you for your assessments. But these are live. They happen during business hours over Zoom, and they're every week. And I'll talk a little bit about exactly what that looks like in a moment. So you do your asynchronous lectures first. You can do those whenever you like. And then you have these tutorials where you work with the other students. We have full-time and part-time options. Full-time means you do 4 units a semester. Part-time means that you do anything other than 4. You might take 3 units, 2 units, or 1 unit a semester. The assessments are also, when we built the graduate diploma, we really built it with the idea in mind that your next course is honours. And so the assessments and the way that the assessments build across the semester and across the year are really designed to take you from bringing you into psychology without knowing very much through very rapidly to being able to design your own research projects and getting ready for honours. So we've really designed the assessment journey with sort of getting you ready for honours in mind. As of August last year, I haven't had a chance to update this year, but as of August last year, we were also the fastest APAC accredited bridging course in Australia, as well as the most affordable course too. And I don't know if that holds this year, I haven't looked yet, but last year we definitely were. All right, this is a little bit of an overview of the workload. Now, studying psychology is hard. I think I've heard that the only subject harder than psychology is law, just to sort of put it out there. There's a lot of material. The average amount of time that you need per unit per week in the graduate diploma is 9 hours. And this is made up of 1.5 hours of pre-recorded lectures. This is that sort of stuff you do on your own before your tutorial. Your live tutorials go for 1.5 hours. And then you have 6 hours of personal study time. So assessments, readings, activities, all of those other bits and pieces that go around the lectures, around the tutorials. So this is your 9 hours per week. And this is the average. So at the start of the semester, you probably don't need that full 6 hours, but maybe near the end of the semester, you might need 7 or 8 hours. It all averages out to this 6 hours. So what this means is that on average, you need to have 9 hours per week per unit. Now, if you take full-time load, that's 4 units, that's 36 hours of study time you need in your calendar per week. So if you do join us here at Cam Miller during orientation, we actually get you to get out your calendar, put in all of your commitments, put in your timetable, and then fill out where this 36 hours is going. And I recommend that you do this because it's something that I can't state enough. You do genuinely need your 36 hours per week to study psychology. This presents challenges if you are working. If you're working full time, you might be able to take 1 unit. If you want to try and study part-time, take 2 units. You might be able to work 2 or 3 days a week. If you're trying to study full-time and get through as quickly as possible, realistically, you could probably work 1 day to still make sure that you've got time to sleep, to look after yourself, to do self-care, all those sorts of things, to look after your well-being while studying and working. It's a big ask. So this is something that really needs to be balanced up when you're thinking about taking on psychology. All right, so a little bit of an overview.
Can I just interrupt? Sorry again, Chris.
Go for it.
I'd love to. You invite me in. I'm gonna jump in and do that. Look, absolutely, that you need to try and make sure that you're putting enough time into your study. But there's also a recognition that lots of people have very different ways of working, and that many of you might be already juggling lots of different things with family and work and managing all that really well, or you might have studied for your whole life and so understand that your capabilities are maybe you have more capacity. The other thing is as well that you can certainly study more, but it's likely then to have an impact upon your ability to fully engage, and that will translate into the marks. So, lots of people are absolutely fine to get through their degree and say, look, I'm happy with credits or passes. I just want the qualification. And that's perfectly fine. You might try to do that as well. I guess the balancing part to this is that many people that are doing this qualification are doing it so that they can then have a next step into honours, and that it does matter in terms of your GPA, your WAM, your weighted average mean, so your marks, in order to get to that next step. So by all means, we're not trying to, if you think you can balance a full-time job with a part-time study load, it's not our job to say that you can't do that. We're just going to be advising you about the pitfalls around that too. And certainly self-care, which is now a core competency for psychologists. It would be irresponsible of us not to advise you that you really need to be prioritising your self-care when you're studying these things in psychology as well.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Now that the scary part of our talk is out of the way, I want to talk a little bit more about the actual subjects that we have, the units that we have in this course. So the graduate diploma has 8 units. If you do the graduate certificate, you will do half of these, so 4 out of the 8. We run each unit once per year. So we have 4 units that run in the first half of the year and 4 units that run the second half. I won't go through them here. On our next slides, I'm going to go through each unit and talk a little bit about each of them. So can I grab the next slide, please? So PSY 401, Theories of Personality. This is a semester 2 unit. Janine McGuinness takes this. Janine is she researches social psychology. She headed up the APS division of social psychology for a number of years as well. She really knows her stuff in this space. But the Theories of Personality looks at how am I as an individual different to the person next to me. It's really about understanding the individual differences. And so this unit will ask, well, what is personality? If we're going to talk about differences between people, what does that mean? It looks at some of the dominant theories in personality, such as biological or trait explanations. It looks at self-concepts. We even take a little bit of a look back in history and we look at psychodynamic explanations of personality as well. We look at, well, how do you measure personality? If we say everyone has some amount of extroversion, how do we measure that? How do we look at someone's extroversionness, if you like? What does that actually mean? But the thing that I think is really interesting with this unit is we take an interdisciplinary perspective on it. So we look at how does personality play out with cognition, with things that go on inside our head? How does personality play out with development as we develop throughout our lifetime? How does it influence health? How does it relate to the workplace? How is personality and culture connected? We really look at personality across the spectrum. Can I get the next slide, please? PSY 402, Research Design and Statistics. So this is a unit that I have taken before, I normally take. Unfortunately, I won't be with Canmiller next year, so someone else will be taking this unit. But this is a semester 1 unit. We like to get the research and statistics out of the way right in the first semester. This unit looks at the scientific method. So right at the start, when Linda was talking about the differences between psychology and counseling, you might have noticed that psychology is a science-based discipline. We develop what are called scientist practitioners. So this unit is about getting your foundations really, really sturdy on the scientific method, on the scientist part of that model. So we talk about what is the scientific method as it applies to psychology. We talk about how do you generate hypotheses? How do you begin to come up with ideas and questions about things? We look at how is research designed and conducted, as well as how do you then analyze the data that you collect, so the statistical analyses. This is usually the subject that makes people a little bit nervous, but we've tried to make it in a way where there's very, very little mathematics involved. It's much more about logic, about philosophy, about how do you answer the questions that you ask of your data. And it's more about how do you run our statistics software and interpret the output rather than understanding the mathematics behind it. So we've really tried to strip back the complexity and look at what do we actually do in the real world with statistics. Can I grab the next slide? Thank you. PSY 403 is social psychology. So this is Janine's unit. This runs in semester 1. So whereas personality is all about how am I different to the person next to me, social psychology is what happens when we're all together. It's kind of the opposite in some ways. So it looks at how your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors of an individual such as yourself are influenced by those around you. And it could be those that are actually around you. It could be those that you imagine to be around you, or even people that are implied to be around you. So really sort of thinking about what does it mean to be around other people. It looks at different theories and research methods, findings and ethical issues in this space, as well as assessments of attitudes and of aspects of social psychology, as well as the limitations of those assessments. But for me, the interesting thing with this unit is it does a deep dive into social influence, into prejudice, discrimination, power structures, intergroup processes. I think this is a really important topic, an important subject for us to all understand how we fit into our broader society. Next slide, please. PSY 404 is developmental psychology. So Sasha Davies takes this unit. It's a semester 1 unit. Sasha will be the new course coordinator next year in my absence. Sasha is also a researcher, but her speciality is in developmental psychology, so working with parents and children. Developmental psychology focuses on how psychology changes across the lifespan. So we go from birth all the way through to death and dying. And things like our personality change and evolve throughout our lifespan. So this unit really has a look at that. We also look at the physical aspects of development because that's really important for understanding how it relates to the psychological side. We also look at cognition and social and emotional aspects of development as well. One of the interesting things for me with developmental psychology is that Sasha's designed the unit to have weekly discussion board posts. So each week students go on and they're asked to make a comment that is on a topic applying that week's material to something that's happening in the world. So some of the topics that come up regularly It's how that week's material relates to education systems, relates to parenting, to what it means to age healthily, and a number of other subjects. So I like that it really tries to apply these things to the real world. Next slide, please. PSY 405, this is cognitive and behavioral neuroscience. It's a big unit. It's run by David Butler. David is also a researcher, and his specialty is in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. This runs in semester 2. This particular unit really focuses on understanding the neuroanatomical features of the nervous system, so your brain, your brainstem, your nerves, and how this neuroanatomical features, how they relate to a range of phenomena, from the way that we see, hear, taste, to learning and memory, intelligence, and so much more. We really take a broad perspective on how neuroscience influences pretty much everything. David looks at many of the commonly used measures in neuroscience. So he looks at things like MRIs, functional MRIs. He looks at EEG scans. So you learn a little bit about how do we actually see into what's happening in the brain, as well as just how those functions relate to other things. And David takes an interesting view on placing a strong cultural lens on everything in neuroscience. So really looking at how culture shapes neuroscience and shapes the way that the brain functions. All right, next slide, please. PSY 406, this is psychopathology. This runs in semester 1. So Jane Anastasios takes psychopathology. Jane is a counseling psychologist, so she's a registered psychologist. And psychopathology really asks the question, well, what does it mean when we say someone might have abnormal behavior or someone might have, say, clinical anxiety? What does that mean? How do we decide that something is abnormal in this space? Should we even use labels like that? So asking a little bit about what does that, should we be using labels? But it does also begin to give you a taster into clinical assessment and diagnosis. So if we're talking about anxiety, how would someone be diagnosed with that? What does that look like? And to do that, we do a deep dive into the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 is the main tool that we use for diagnoses. Now, at the end of this unit, you won't be able to diagnose anyone. It's not designed for that. This is meant to be a unit that exposes you to many of the sorts of things that might be diagnosed and some of the information about how we go about that. But it doesn't train you in being able to do it yourself. If you want to do that, you've got to study for the full 6 years. You'll get to the end. And then assessment and diagnosis is something that you can look into. This is just a taster. All right. Almost there. PSY 408. This is our research capstone. 408 and 409 are designed to come at the end of your journey in this course. You don't have to take them in the order, but that's kind of the order that we designed them in mind. I like to think of 408 as your honors prep unit. So whereas research design and statistics is all about common research designs, your garden variety stuff, 408 looks at more advanced and complex research methodology designs. It also looks at common problems with research and how we've come over them. So for example, talking about pre-registration and the open access framework in science. And if you're not sure what those things are, stick around for 408 and you'll learn lots about them. This unit also gives you the opportunity to begin to explore an area of literature that you're interested in. So it allows you to pick a topic, you set your own research question on anything you like, and you begin to think about, well, if I wanted to ask a question, do some research in this space, what question might I ask and how would I go about doing it? The idea is that you do this within the constraints of an honors project, and that by the end of the unit, you've developed yourself, hopefully, quite a robust honors research project, so that when you go into honors, and I didn't mention this earlier, but in honors, you have to do a research project. You collect data, you analyze it. It's a full, proper research project. You can go into honors, have a supervisor, and already have a project ready to go. You've already got yourself a proposal for what you might do. You may or may not be able to do that with your supervisor, but it's a starting point for discussion. All right, next slide, please. PSY 409. This is also taken by Jane. It's a semester 2 unit. And this is interdisciplinary approaches to mental health. So this unit looks at what does it mean to be a psychologist working in a larger team? And what does it mean to be a consumer or a client in that system? So it looks at how do psychologists work with counselors, medical practitioners, social workers, community mental health workers, and more. But not just how does the psychologist work with these teams, but what is it like for the consumer? What is it like for the client on the other end, working amongst all these professionals trying to manage healthcare problems? All right, I'm going to take a bit of a pause there. Before I introduce Georgia, were there any questions?
Thanks again, Chris. It's a very comprehensive overview of all of the great things that you'll be able to study within these programs. There have been a couple of questions that have come through both in advance of tonight as well as throughout, but I'm going to actually pass it to Georgia first because I think it's really valuable for attendees to really hear directly from students. So it'd be great to hear, Georgia, your perspectives and what your experience studying like has been so far. And I might hold the questions till the end where we do a bit more moderation, if that's okay. But
Sure.
Georgia, on to you.
Thanks, Meng. Thanks, Chris. And hey, everyone on the other end of the Zoom. I'm Georgia. I thought maybe I'd start with a little bit of context about how I came to the course, because I think that really has changed the way that I tackle it, in a sense. So I come to psychology from working in the arts for decades. My professional life earlier I was in teaching and lecturing at universities and working curatorially in contexts in community with artists, many of them living with neurodiversity. And that work gave me a really critical and kind of engaged perspective and grounded me in people's lived experiences. I also have my own story of psychosocial challenges and mental health. I'm sure many people do. And for instance, when COVID hit, my industry was totally shaken and I knew I needed a change. And so hence slowly coming to the decision that I do psychology. And I know that in our cohort, everyone has a different story. Some are working already in psychotherapy as hypnotherapists or in like Gestalt therapy, very interesting stuff. Others are corporate types, no offense. Others come at it from more a community work background. And for some, the study is like a continuation, picking up on a bachelor's and grad certificate pathway, for instance. Others, it's persistence, and many, like me, it's a whole new chapter. And I think reflecting today, it's really what makes the grad dip unique, because we've got this convergence of people making a pretty major decision in their life to come at psychology and really committing to it at this point as well. So my experience with Ken Miller in the first instance, I just have to say, as a big nerd, I'm really, really loving my time with Ken Miller, and they're not paying me to say that, unfortunately. It's been a very difficult path, like the subjects and the workload, as Chris said, is hard, but I've found this new knowledge really life-changing. So I started midway through last year and I eased into study in a part-time capacity just to get my head around it. It had been a good decade since I was doing my honours in another field previously. So I thought I'd start slow. And then this year ramped up with an almost full-time load of 3 subjects a semester. And I'm aiming to graduate in 8 weeks. So please wish me luck. But yeah, in terms of the course, in the first instance, really, really impressed by the quality of teaching and the high level of individual support. I know that if I have a question, I've got a particular need around access, for instance, or an intellectual curiosity, I know I have confidence to go and ask that question, find that support, find that person. And this is far beyond any university kind of Big 8 experience that I've had on both sides, actually, the resources, the time, and I guess the personal or intimate kind of culture of the university is there as a really supportive energy, yeah. The course design and the content feels scientifically rigorous, really developing my scientific thinking skills, new kind of field for me. It feels contemporary and very clear engagement in professional practice through the different teachers' experiences and research engagement. And I can also say it feels very anchored in an Australian context, like what it means to be working in psychology in this cultural landscape on this country. And I think the subjects, the teachers do a great job of kind of anchoring the work in this context. Another point, you can really tell that Ken Miller is a nonprofit in the best way. I found the course to be very values-led, and because it's a small institution and so focused on psychology and psychotherapy, there's a sense of agility, feeling that the course is really ahead of the curve compared to larger universities. For instance, with a focus on critical engagement, reflexivity, and honestly, like a really earnest striving to decolonize psychology as a discipline as well. It feels very present, and speaking with peers in other universities, Swinburne, Monash, Melbourne, this kind of thing, is often like a bit of like, oh, I wish I had that in my course, or we don't go anywhere near that type of content. So I feel quite privileged to be learning in this way. And the small classes really make a difference. So feeling like you're not one of hundreds, you're literally one of a few dozen. You're known, and it produces a sense of kind of accountability to one another. So while I prioritize studying online to make, it work within a real life, the course still feels really intimate, given the scale of the cohort. Yeah. So advice that Chris asked me to give some kind of advice to my younger self, if I was entering the course. So I guess halfway through last year, what would be things that I wish I knew when I was starting? So in the first instance, like recognize where you're coming from and the transferable skills. I thought my background was quite different, but there are so many kind of through lines that have made sense. But also recognizing where the gaps in my knowledge are and the certain skills that you want to chase and find the support to meet those needs. Recognizing that feelings come up, and just the need to be gentle with yourself through the course and to use the supports available. I think the self-care that Chris mentioned is really crucial. There's such a major issue of burnout in our field, and I think if we can understand how to support ourselves through the emotional contours of studying about it, then we can continue those practices as we move into research or move into clinical work. Part of that is keeping on reflecting about who we are and how we're changing. And I found like writing is a really great practice for that. I've also found like moving my body. I've taken up tennis uncharacteristically, but finding that way to like move my body and move my thinking and have space around the studies to have time to reflect and have that kind of processing in the background as well. Just a couple more points. So I'd say find your people. I think that being a small course, it feels really intimate, and there's so much support we can provide each other, from debriefing on this lecture or trying to work out what an approach might be to a particular assessment. I think there's an opportunity to find some real keepers in the mix and kind of travel through the journey together. And I think the last thing is just to be surprised by how much the course changes you. I've really found that. It's been only 18 months, but it's been really striking. And I think asking like the so-called stupid questions to the class, but also to yourself, means that the mystification, or like the mystery of what it is to be a psychologist kind of breaks down, and you start to identify with it in a stronger way. Maybe on cue to hand to you, Meng, for some questions. And happy to field any specific thoughts that people have as well.
Thanks, Georgia. I think that's just it's always so lovely to hear from students, and I think that was very eloquently done, just kind of elaborating how Ken Miller is a very unique and intimate experience, just as you said. And like I mentioned, I might kind of pose some questions towards the end, but I just wanted to jump off of that and really extend on some of the other student services and supports that are available to folks who do enroll at Cairnmillar. So one thing that's really great, again, we're a small community but growing, and one of those growing spaces very much is our global student cohort. So students who are international or non-domestic do have access to a number of really tailored supports, just to acknowledge that they do often have different experiences or different transition challenges than sometimes domestic students. So we do run a number of very tailored and targeted social activities, workshops, as well as other study advice, just to support, again, that experience of being an international student in Australia. One of our other supports is for student academics. So we have a number of really great staff across our library and learning support teams who offer one-on-one consultations. There are academic skills sessions and workshops that are delivered throughout the year. And students do have access to a number of other strategies and tips just to make sure that they can actually study successfully and study in the way that best suits them and their personal learning styles. And then speaking of personal learning styles, we also acknowledge that some students may have kind of ongoing or temporary accessibility needs that can impact on their ability to succeed. So we do also really make sure that we can provide those flexible study modifications. Again, whether that's because students do identify as having that ongoing need, or if you just have, special circumstances or things that come up unexpectedly, in your life, which, we do acknowledge can happen without warning or preparation. So next things, we wanted to start talking about just some logistics. So what is the selection process? What do you need and when do you need to do it? So applications are open already. We are making ongoing offers. So we really do encourage students to get in early just to maximize your chance. But you can apply to us directly through our website and through our application portal. There are no WAM requirements and no admissions interviews. So we really try and make sure that we're creating that accessible pathway to study for students. If you are non-domestic, you do need to provide proof of identity and citizenship status. And if you do want to take advantage of fee help or other study loans, you do also have to make sure that you provide documents indicating your eligibility for that. But if you do have any questions, I'd really encourage you to either reach out to our applications team or our course coordinator, as well as check the course pages on our website for a lot more information about some of the specifics of applying, but also the course structures. One of the other services that's also really great for any prospective students considering applying is that we do also offer one-on-one admissions consultations. And that gives you an opportunity to chat individually with someone in our applications team to talk through your specific circumstances. So what are your study interests? What is your background? And how can we best support you in then applying to the right course? In terms of tuition fees and funding, again, we acknowledge that unfortunately as a non-public institution, we don't have CSP places, but we really do our best to maintain kind of reasonable and appropriate fees just to make sure that we can provide as many students the opportunity to study as possible. Again, you'll find more information about all of our tuition fees on our website, and there are a number of ways to pay for those as well. So as I mentioned earlier, for eligible domestic students, there are fee help loans. You may be able to access external study loans or scholarships as well through other organizations, but otherwise you can can pay for your fees upfront and directly. And we can also arrange a number of payment plans and flexible payment options for students who do need that flexibility. For some of our other courses, there are also internal scholarships and subsidies. So if you decide to use one of the psychological sciences programs as an entry into other study at Cairnmillar, you may also be able to access those funds in future study options. So just some key things or key takeaways to summarize again. As I mentioned, applications are already open and ongoing offers have been made from August onwards. So like I said, really encouraging you to get in early or to contact our team if you have any questions about how to apply. Fee help is available, as mentioned, for eligible domestic students. And as Chris referred to earlier, there are some really flexible study modes. So whether that's online, on campus, full-time, part-time. So we really try and make sure that we can create an option that works for you. And it is that pathway to ARPA registration after further study. So a good step on your journey to becoming a practicing provider, if that's something that you're really hoping to do. So now we've come to the time where we really encourage you, as I mentioned at the beginning, to take advantage of both Dr. Kilby, Professor Byrne, and George's attendance today to really hear directly from them. If you have any questions or things that you've just really wanted to know, I might get us started. As I mentioned, there were some questions sent through at the very beginning, so I might pose the first one, Georgia, to yourself. What does a week with the programs being quite flexible, what does a week of study actually look like for you? And how would you advise students to kind of manage that with other commitments, whether that's work, personal life, parenting? What's the best way that you've kind of managed it? And what would be your advice to prospective students considering applying?
Sure. I would love some advice on this as well. But my take is to be realistic about how long things take me. I know that I can be quite slow and need time to process. And so, for instance, I've sacrificed quite a bit of income to come here. I'm in a position to be able to do that, and it's a choice not everybody has. But I work like only 1.5 days a week, and it's very casual, and I can pick it up and drop it off as the semester goes. So that's one way that I manage. I think I'm probably on the freaky end of putting in more than the 9 hours, and I wouldn't say that's normal in the cohort. People definitely can do it in a lighter touch than I do, but I did get a bit carried away sometimes. But I think time management, really having a sense of, yeah, like I said, how long things take you, but also getting the color coding on your Google Calendar out and really like getting nitty-gritty with placing certain tasks at the times of the day when you know that your brain is on, or watching lectures that you can absorb while you're doing the dishes. You know, really working it with the shape of your life makes sense in whatever shape that might be.
Thank you very much. Chris, I might pose the next one to you. Someone's just asked about, with how flexible it is and with it being online, what are your recommendations for students to make sure that they actually then do stay accountable? So kind of making sure that they do actually watch all of the recordings, that they do actually engage in discussions. What are some of those measures for accountability, I suppose?
It's certainly built into the course. So most of our units have weekly assessments. They're worth very, very little, usually 1-2%, not worth much at all. But they come at the end of the week's materials and they test your knowledge. And so every week you're sort of accruing a couple more points towards your final grade to really help keep you accountable and on track with doing the work that you need to be doing. The same with the tutorials. The tutorials assume that you've already watched the lectures and you have that material. So when you're turning up to those tutorials with other students, if you've engaged in all that material, it makes for an experience where you can engage in those tutorials much more as well. So there's a few different things built into the course itself to try and help promote that sort of accountability. I think, like Georgia was suggesting, using a colored Google Calendar or Microsoft Calendar is a fantastic way of making sure that you've got time put aside to do all the things that you need to do to also help keep yourself accountable. Or find a study buddy and keep each other accountable. I think that's also really certainly what I did when I was a student, having other students around and we were both keeping each other on our toes really helped.
Thank you. And you know what, I might as well pose one to each of you. So Linda, I might give you the next one. Someone just asked, with that, and we talked about it at the very beginning as well, that kind of full pathway to registration can be quite overwhelming and sometimes confusing for folks. But outside of that, what are some of the maybe non-traditional further study pathways or career pathways that you would imagine someone with these qualifications could actually go on and do? And then I might, after that, Georgia, pass it to you just to say, what are your next steps in terms of after finishing your current studies?
Sure. So just in terms of the graduate, I think that most people do come into the graduate with a plan to continue on and go at least to honours and beyond that. But having said that, a lot of people decide that they're, dipping their toes into psychology is enough. And sometimes it's to supplement their knowledge specifically around human behavior. So it might be that they're working in HR or HR adjacent kinds of careers. Also, they might be in management. So, for example, there really isn't a job in any field that you can think about where understanding human behavior doesn't enhance your capacity in that job role. It might not be explicit, but all of those kind of soft skills, understanding about social processes, understanding about developmental psychology. So if you're working in, for example, even retail, understanding that young people have different brain processes than older people, all of these kinds of things can really enhance any kind of job. Understanding, for example, in was it 408? Sorry, I need to look at my board to get the right. Yeah, so Sci 408, which is really important to understanding how we evaluate evidence, something that's incredibly important today when there is so much misinformation that's out there. We're teaching people how you understand and evaluate what is evidence, what makes good evidence. So these are all things that people can take forward into any kind of job at all.
And Georgia, to you, what's your next step?
Sure. I mean, I don't have a single pathway ahead of me, but I am applying at the moment to a billion different courses for my fourth year or the next step in my studies. I think at the moment my preference is MPP, which is a Master of Professional Practice, and getting into courses that either with Ken Miller in a couple of years after honours, or courses that take up that fourth year as part of the master's. That's one route that gets you working in practice as a general psychologist a bit faster. But I'm also really interested in research, decision making, and those structural factors. So clinical and the kind of research opportunities in that pathway are really fascinating to me. But I have to say, I'm also applying for public health and interested in like behavioral economics and all of these things, which are very much outside of this very strict APAC pathway. But as Linda said, definitely use the psychology knowledge to inform those types of practices.
Brilliant, thank you. So we do have one last question with Chris. Actually, you've already asked Georgia to kind of speak to in terms of what do you wish you'd known. So Georgia, I might just give you a different one, which is just as you're coming towards the end, what's been the best part? Like, what do you look back most fondly on? And then Chris, I will still ask that question to you though. So for any prospective students thinking about commencing in psychological sciences, what is one thing you wish all new Psych-Sci students knew? And that could be about the process of applying, it could be about preparing to study or succeeding once you're in your studies. What's just one thing that you just wish people were aware of or thought through? Maybe Georgia first, and then Chris, we'll end with you.
It's really interesting. I've been thinking a lot and reading a lot about decision making at the moment as part of my research capstone project, and part of that is reflecting on the decision to move into psychology. And I guess it's one discipline, to be frank, that has maybe shedding a little bit of the aura of like elitism. It's a bit of a fancy zhuzhi program to study, and I grew up pretty broke. I grew up in a regional area. I was always interested in psychology, but I didn't really feel like it was for me. There was a bit of an unidentified barrier between it. But I guess the advice in this sense would be that just start it and feel what it's like. And actually, it's been life-changing to think, to absorb all this knowledge and witness my own thinking strategies change, and then witness myself change through that process. So yeah, just recognizing that options are there and you don't know what it's like until you try it.
Chris, over to you to take us home.
Sure. I think I was reflecting very quickly on different kinds of students that start off in the grad dip, and something that I think helps a lot of students is to be really curious when you start. Don't assume anything and ask the questions and turn every stone over. Have a look at things, and all the staff are more than happy to talk. Something about researchers is we get very excited when you ask us to talk about research. So more than happy to talk about things, about material, about the subject more broadly. So be curious, get involved, but also be prepared to be challenged and taken in all sorts of different directions. And as Georgia said, feelings do come up when you're studying a course like this. By its very nature, we're talking about some very difficult things that can happen to people. And some of that may resonate with you potentially. So be ready to be challenged in that way, but ready to be challenged in the sense that you might come to the grad dip going, I'm going to go into psychology, and actually come out going, you know what? Health economics sounds really cool. I want to go do that. There is no one end point, and be open to all those sorts of things. So yeah, long and short, be curious.
Thanks very much, folks. And again, I want to thank everyone in our panel for the time and the insight today, as well as for all of you who've attended for your interest in studying at Cairnmillar. We really do hope to welcome you to our community soon. So as mentioned at the beginning, get your applications in, contact our team if you do have any questions, and definitely take advantage of one of those individual consultations if you think that would be of value. But otherwise, we'll be making sure to distribute recordings of today's conversations. And if you do have any questions, just reach out. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evenings, and thanks again. Bye for now, folks.